The first bill on the agenda is House File 51, and so we have Representative Richardson. And Representative Richardson is not on the committee, so the chair will move House File 51 to bring it before the committee, and the intention is that it will be laid over for possible inclusion in an omnibus later on. So the bill is before us, and Representative Richardson, you have an author's amendment, but I don't see it here. Oh, we don't have, I guess we don't have the amendment. Okay. All right. Well, we don't have copies of the amendment, Representative Richardson, so maybe what we'll do is let you just go ahead. Ms. Niedernhofer is going to get that copied, but you could just go ahead, if you would, and describe what the changes are if they're substantive, and go ahead and present your bill. And then we'll catch up and actually adopt your amendment. I'm sorry about that.
No worries. Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, House File 51, as amended, establishes the Emmett Lewis Till Victims Recovery Program with the Minnesota Department of Health with a one-time appropriation of $500,000 from the general fund in 2024. The bill would require the Commissioner of Health to develop a culturally informed grant program for victims and families who've experienced significant trauma related to violence, false accusations, wrongful convictions, and hate crimes, and activities that have devastated families. It would also require a report to come back to the legislature. The bill would require health and wellness supports, remembrance and legacy preservation, and community resources and services to promote healing. The research is clear that unresolved trauma impacts people's future health. When trauma goes untreated, it festers and increases risks of mental health diagnoses, physical risks such as high blood pressure, stroke, or heart attack, self-harm, suicidal thoughts or ideation, just to name a few. To be clear, families and communities are hurting, and there have been a number of experiences of unrelenting trauma on trauma, because when we hear names like George Floyd, Amir Locke, Philando Castile, Kobe Heisler, Jamar Clark, or the names of Taylor Hayden and Brittany Clarity and so many others, so many more names than we have time to name, there's a clear need for dedicated resources for healing and support. This bill is focused on ensuring that there's access to resources and supports for victims and families that are hurting in the aftermath of such traumatic experience. Madam Chair, I'd like to yield my time to my testifier today to share about what this bill would mean to them and their family.
All right. Thank you, Representative Richardson. So first on my list here, I have Deborah Watts. Welcome to the committee. If you would just introduce yourself for the record and then go ahead with your testimony.
Thank you. Madam Chair of the Health, Finance, and Policy Committee and staff, along with members, thank you. My name is Deborah Watts, co-founder of the Emmett Till Legacy Foundation and a cousin of Emmett Lewis Till, who at the age of 14 years of age was brutally murdered in 1955, nearly 68 years ago, just down the river south of here in Mississippi. On August 21st, in 1955, he traveled from Chicago south to Mississippi to visit relatives, just to take a vacation. Just a few days later, on August 24th, while visiting a store in Money, Mississippi, he whistled at 21-year-old store owner Carolyn Bryant, now known as Carolyn Bryant Donham. In the early morning hours on August 28th, in 1955, her husband, Roy Bryant, and his half-brother, J.W. Milam, kidnapped young Emmett, and at gunpoint from his great-uncle's home, they ventured some 30-some miles in a torturous journey that we now call the Till Trail of Tears and Terror. Emmett was beaten, he was lynched, and shot in the head, and with a 75-pound cotton gin fan tied around his neck with barbed wire, he was thrown in the Black Bayou. And on August 31st, his badly beaten, decomposed body was pulled from the Tallahatchie River. His mother, my shero, Mamie Till Mobley, a mother of an only son, through her unspeakable pain and trauma and grief, as you can imagine, but also her courage, she decided to allow her son's monstrous-looking appearance to be viewed during his funeral on September 3rd by insisting on an open casket funeral. Seen by thousands who were left horrified and traumatized by bearing witness to the ugliness of racialized violence, yes, a lynching of her only precious son, Emmett, or Bobo, as she affectionately called him. By September 6, 1955, J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant were indicted on kidnapping and murder, and on September 19th, the trial began. On September 23rd, the jury rendered a verdict of not guilty with only 67 seconds of deliberation. In 1956, they were paid $4,000 for their story, an exaggerated confession that appeared in Look magazine. So they actually confessed, but they were acquitted. Well, this type of violence and injustice occurred back in 1619 when the first slaves arrived in the British North America. And so historically, according to a recent statement by Congressman Bobby Rush, and it was sponsored by many in Minnesota as well, he authored the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act now that is law. There were some 6,500 lynchings that occurred from 1870 to 1950. And based on the expert research of the Equal Justice Initiative, Lynching in America and Other Lynching in America documents, this was a problem in America and still occurs. And we have to go back to bring this forward. But most importantly, as Representative mentioned, I'm sorry, and I'm kind of choked up because this is the emotional time for me. I just want to say,
We
I
understand.
never
Take your
thought I'd be
time.
here. I just want to say that.
We appreciate that you're here, and take
And,
all the time you need.
Okay. So in 1955, Mamie Till Mobley, Emmett's mother, like many mothers today, thought about ending it all. But for her, the thought of a child possibly finding her without having her fashion-forward pants on, that made the choice for her unthinkable. Because in 1955, most women weren't wearing pants, right? So if she jumped, which she thought about that, at the brink of her grief and pain. So she lived through that pain, fighting for 47 years without the benefit of therapy or any targeted or intentional support to maintain a healthy way to recover. And this all took a toll on her both mentally and physically for a number of years. Without the adequate support or resources, she had only the memories of her son, the sympathy, and the embrace of the world to sustain her. Karen Wells, the mother of Amir Locke, who was shot and killed by police in Minneapolis, executing a no-knock warrant a year ago, she was barely strong enough to give her testimony during a hearing for this bill heard last year. But she knew how important it was to get this done and get some support for her family. But she said during a recent interview, mentally, in order for me to get through the day, I basically just have to tell myself that Amir is on vacation. My heart don't beat the same anymore. It does not beat the same. It's broken. It's never the same. The best surgeon in America could never repair my heart after what they did to my son. So unfortunately, that same theme is shared by mothers, fathers, siblings, children, and a generation of family members, and that in many instances suffer in silence. But many thanks to many organizations like the community-based organizations in the Twin Cities, Communities United Against Police Violence, CARE, Minnesota, they've recorded over 400 names of known victims of police brutality and violence and other types of violence in Minnesota. as shown on this poster. This is Minnesota. Ending at George Floyd. And other organizations like Families Supporting Families Against Police Violence, Justice Networks, they're giving a much-needed voice and looking at various solutions in public safety to support those families who are bonded by a common theme of loss. We certainly, as an organization and those that have lost loved ones, aren't attempting to right all of the wrongs of the past. But this bill, the Emmett Lewis Till Victims Recovery Program, is an important step that we in Minnesota, due north, the star of the north, can lead the nation by helping families of victims and their heirs recover and gain their footing to begin a more empowered and sustainable journey towards healing mentally and physically from the loss of their loved ones. As we think about the impact here, there are just a few names that I'd like to mention. Certainly not all of these on this poster, but I would like, as we customarily in this circle of loss and grief, we say their names. And in a march that was held July 30th of last year, I would like to just read these few names here. Say their names for Tekle Sundberg, Winston Smith, Travis Jordan, Jamar Clark, Dalal Eid, Justin Tagan, Brian Keonis, Jafford Smith, Demetrius Hill, Dante Wright, Cordell Handy, Thurman Blevins, Courtney Williams, Lionel Lewis, Marcus Golden, Walter Collins, Philando Castile, Colby Dimmick Heisler, Chaser View, Paul Castaway, Isaac Aiden, Hardell Sherrill, Fong Lee, Emmett Till, Phil Quinn, Dontello Wright, Deanna Marie, George Floyd, Noah Kelly, Christopher, Amir Locke, Marcos Paramo, Elijah Thomas, and Billy Hughes. Just a few names. So this impact, the impact of this bill, and we believe that there is a void right now, and this will help to fill that void. We know it's not perfect, but it will be a step that I think that Minnesota can take to be a shining light on repairing and helping these families recover in their lives to move forward.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony. Next, we're going to have Carrie Johnson Heisler.
Madam Chair,
Representative Richardson.
they were unable to make it today.
Okay, and what about Valerie Castile? Is she here?
She's unable to make it today as
Okay.
well. I think it's just.
All right, thank you. So we now have the amendment. It's just being passed out. Let me just see if there's anyone else in the audience, in the public, who wishes to testify on the bill. Is there anyone else who wishes to testify? All right, I'm not seeing anyone, so let's just give it a little moment here. Representative Richardson, do you have a copy of your amendment?
I do.
Okay,
Yes,
maybe you
Madam
want to just describe it while we're waiting for it to be passed out here.
Sure, Madam Chair. So the amendment to House File 51 clarifies eligibility for the grant funds to include victims who have experienced trauma, including historical trauma resulting from events such as assault or another violent physical act, intimidation, false accusations, wrongful convictions, or hate crime. It also clarifies the dates within the bill as well, related to reports that would be due from the Minnesota Department of Health.
Okay, so the chair will move the adoption of the A2-1 author's amendment that Representative Richardson just described. Is there any discussion to the amendment? All right, seeing none, all in favor of adoption of the A2-1 amendment, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. So with that, any discussion, members? Representative Baker, or Back, sorry.
problem. Yes, Mike.
And you might need to try to, I know it's awkward, but if you can talk into the mic.
You're right. There
Yeah.
Madam Chair, to the author of the bill, was wondering, with this new program, how many individuals would be served with this new program? Thank you.
Representative Richardson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative, for the question. So the bill would allow not only individuals to be served, but it would also allow for memorials to be established as well. And so that would be a question in terms of looking at how much of the funds would be for direct care versus memorials as well. And so that would be done by the bill in consultation with the Commissioner of Health, along with victims who have experienced these sorts of traumatic experiences.
Representative Backer.
And thank you, I appreciate it. So if I'm hearing you correct, I want to make sure I'm interpreting this correct. So the commissioner will make that discretion on if it's going to be for individual or memorial. Any projections? Are we able to serve 10 people, 20 people? Just was wondering what that is. Thank you.
Representative Richardson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. Thank you, Representative Backer. In terms of the work here, the goal is to really have this be a community-driven process with the community working alongside the commissioner to determine what that would look like. We know that we have, as this list shows, many families who have been impacted here, and we want to ensure that they are part of the process in determining what the $500,000 appropriation would look like, knowing that they are navigating through some pretty traumatic experiences. So at this point, that would be in consultation with those surviving family members.
No further questions.
All right, thank you. Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Richardson. So I guess the answer to Representative Backer just confused me. Can you expand a little bit on the memorial, I guess? When I read the bill, and I've had some experience in my day job actually working with and attracting culturally specific providers to provide trauma therapies, supportive services, and it's difficult, really difficult. And so as I was reading the bill, I was looking at this, and that's how I looked at it, is that this was actually to provide direct services to victims who've experienced violence from a government setting, from whatever the case, based on the eligibility. But is that not the case?
Representative Richardson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the bill states, it is to provide not only direct services, but it also can provide for memorials for families, so it's a both and.
Thank you.
Representative Nadeau.
I just can't see that in the, where can you point to the line that talks about memorial? Maybe it's in the amendment. I'm sorry, I just don't see it.
Representative Richardson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 1 of the bill, line 121, line 122, they all talk about the various aspects that the funding can be used for. Starting on line 1.19, health and wellness services, which include services and support to address physical, mental health, cultural needs, spiritual and faith-based needs. Number 2, remembrance and legacy preservation activities. Number 3, cultural awareness services.
Thank you. Any
Thank you, Madam.
follow-up, Representative Nadeau?
Yes, and so, just so that I'm, to be clear, so that means a memorial. So that's a memorial.
I think that's what she's saying,
Okay.
yes.
Got it. Thank you, Representative Richardson. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to the author Looking at the amended language, I'm trying to understand, is this limited to historic events in Minnesota? Or is it more broad? I don't see any limitations, so it could be from anywhere.
Representative Richardson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The focus of this bill would be to serve residents of Minnesota.
Follow-up, Representative Quam.
Well, actually, clarifying the question wasn't for residents, it was for events. So is it just events that have happened historically in Minnesota, or I'm not seeing any language to clearly delineate a limitation that we're just looking at Minnesota events. So I'd like clarification and an answer to the first question with that clarification.
Okay, I'll let Representative Richardson answer, but, Representative Quam, when we treat people for whatever we treat them for, we don't ask whether they got their mental illness or whatever it is within our borders. We just treat residents.
Madam Chair, I
Representative-
just wanted clarification, because when we write law, we need to have it specific, because courts will, if it isn't specific,
Yeah.
right, so the
Representative
author.
Richardson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This bill would ensure that people who are surviving family members that are residing in Minnesota would have access to services, and the funds that are associated with this bill will be in direct relation to people who are in Minnesota. And I think it's really important that we recognize when these tragic events happen, the Tell family lives here in Minnesota. And so if you have individuals who are in need of help and support because of mental health needs or traumatic services, I don't think that we should draw the line and say that because their trauma occurred outside of the state that they're not eligible. So this would ensure that people who are residents of the state who are in need of culturally specific support would be able to receive that.
Thank you. Follow-up, Representative Quam, and then we're going to.
Yes, Madam Chair. And I understand the authors, I just wanted clarity, but that means that any person who has a family connection to the Holocaust, that's in your amendment and in the original bill, including historic trauma, and that was a very large historic trauma, would be included. And then if we look at the FBI, they keep a record of annual hate crimes, and many years over the decades and decades that they've done that, the largest individual group has been the Jewish community. And so as I'm reading this, there's a very broad group of people living in Minnesota that would be included in this. And is there going to be, I'm not seeing anything here, it's discretionary to the commissioner, so I'm not seeing any criteria delineating between any specific types of events other than hate crimes and historic trauma. So I just wanted, the members and the author to realize without some clarifying language, this is an extremely large pool, and I'm trying to understand, how we're looking at addressing this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, I'm going to go on to the next member, and, maybe in a further remark, Representative Richardson will want to incorporate that, maybe. So Representative Hemmingson-Yager?
Thank you. It's more of a comment than a question, but thank you. I just want to thank you for kind of bringing this up, especially with this lens, and I feel this comment is appropriate being on the Health Committee as well. We owe a lot to our scientific discoveries and our medications due to a cell line who was taken from a Black woman named Henrietta Lacks. So anybody in science who has heard of HL60, those cells were taken without her knowing and were cultivated. It's an immortal cell line. And, her family continues to struggle because they were not taken care of. So I just kind of want to point that out too, that this has broader implications than just the violence that is experienced that Representative Richardson and her testifier describes. So I just kind of want to, I guess, in point of information, I guess. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Representative. Representative New Brindley and then Murphy. Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Madam Chair, I've promoted you. Representative Richardson, I'm looking at the evaluation portion of the bill, and I guess I might ask Madam Chair if there has been a fiscal note requested on this bill?
This is a bill with an appropriation. I don't know if there would be a fiscal note.
Chair Liebling, Representative New Brindley, a fiscal note has been requested. It hasn't been completed yet.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Thank you for that, Madam Chair. I assume I may continue. Thank you, Madam Chair. My question, Representative Richardson, under the evaluation of the program, grant recipients must provide the commissioner with information required by the commissioner. And then on line 2.11, this report must include information on the operation and results of the grant program to the extent possible. And I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about what your vision is for that. What kind of metrics might be considered in that? What kind of outcomes are we hoping to see from this particular grant program?
Representative Richardson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative New Brindley, for the questions. As MDH does a lot of contracting throughout the year. Typically, what they are evaluating is not only the number of people served, but also outcomes that would be related to receiving service in terms of how folks are functioning. And it's also an opportunity to be able to look at impacts. Thinking about, for example, cultural awareness or any sort of community sort of gathering, being able to provide the outcomes of those types of activities.
Representative New Brindley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wait, did you just call me Senator?
No.
Oh, thank heaven. I thought that's not a promotion.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to say that there wasn't a day that went by in my campaign where I didn't honor Emmett Till. And I honored him because he's the turning point. This story is the turning point. His mother is the turning point. Not only the civil rights, but human rights. There's a lot of people that for the first time recognize that this was just not right. These atrocities were way over the top. So it's about human rights, too. Only the way a mother could show she took those steps to have that wake and show the atrocities, and that was the turning point. 4 months later, Rosa Parks sat on the bus. And so it was a really turning point. What I'd like to see a little bit more of in your bill is the talk about human rights. We all agree. The reason I told this story and I was so committed to it is it's about human rights. It's just wrong what happened. And we need to correct the wrong. But it's not just civil rights, it's our human rights. We're all part of that. And I think that is his story, is that he was the first one. His story, his mother, was really the first ones to get us all to really look at our human rights. And what we were doing was not right. So anyway, I'd just like to plant that seed and to see if you've considered at all maybe adding more things about human rights in there, because I think it's for all of us, not just not just for, and I think it would go more to tell the story for Emmett Till, too. That is his biggest contribution, is he turned the hearts and minds of many.
All right, thank you. So that's all the member comment we have. I'm just going to make a brief comment, and then I'll turn it over to you for a final word, Representative Richardson. So I think, first of all, thank you to Ms. Watts for your wonderful testimony. And what I think is really unique and compelling about this proposal is it really talks about trauma and about trauma in communities in a way that we really haven't done. And I think in the legislature in the last several years, you know, in part due to efforts of people like Representative Richardson, I think that the legislators are becoming much more aware of the impact of trauma and the impact and meaning of historical trauma and how these things can play out in people's lives today, that we're all products of our history and products of the stories we were told in our families. You know, I don't mean stories that are made up, I mean stories of our history. And how those things can impact people and affect them and impact communities and affect them. And so I think this is a really important bill that brings this to the forefront and says, let's see if there's a way we can change the course for people who have been impacted. So I think it's very interesting. Obviously, it's, I guess we didn't ask you, but it seems like this is really kind of a new concept of how do we address trauma in communities as well as with individuals. So I appreciate the bill very much, and thank you very much for bringing it, Representative Richardson, and please go ahead and make a closing comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the discussion, members. And I want to thank Ms. Watts as well for coming back again to share a very difficult story. I think the words of Mamie Till Mobley said it best. She said, when something happened to the Black people in the South, I said, that's their business, not mine. Now I know how wrong I was. The murder of my son has shown me that what happens to any of us anywhere in this world had better be the business of all of us. And as we look at this list of names that are here, what we are talking about is decades and decades of unmitigated trauma. This is just Minnesota. There are families that are behind these names that have been devastated, and some of these devastating experiences have happened in such close proximity to another that there's not even time to process, and there's not even time to grieve. And when you have a community that is in so much pain and experiencing an unrelenting form of trauma left unmitigated, it will be disastrous. So I am hopeful, Madam Chair, that this is the last time that we'll have to come back and testify in support of this bill, and hope that we can finally make movement on this year. Thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you so very much, and thank you both. So House File 51 as amended is laid over for possible inclusion.